Oh my gosh. Stop it. Good? Okay. All right. So today we are going to be talking about community ecology. I want to give you a heads up about something. One, I'm being filmed for this. And two, the way I'm going to run this is I'm going to ask you questions about community ecology. You might not know the answers, but I want to hear from you. That sound good? So even if you're not 100% sure of the answer, I want to hear about what you're thinking. So please volunteer and let's talk. This is a big group, so there's plenty of people who can give their thoughts and opinions about things. First of all, I want to ask, who went to the population ecology lecture that Ms. Bartley did? Okay, a good amount of you, most of you. Cool. So what do you guys talk about? You talk about population ecology. So what's a population? Oh, this is already silence. Let's do this. All right. Many of you raised your hand. Who went to the lecture? Let's raise hands again. All right. That's less people. All right. So what's a population? What do you remember?
It's a group of the same species in the same geographical area.
Okay, same species in the same geographical area. That's population. So what would you think a community is? Any guess? What's a community? Yeah.
It's basically different types of species living together, dependent on each other for something.
Okay, can everyone hear what he's saying? No? Okay, so let's try to speak louder. So what do you got?
It's different types of species living together who are dependent on each other for food or water.
Okay, all right, so these are different species living together in the same area, and they're dependent on each other, so there's some interactions between them. So that means it's populations. Communities are made up of populations, right? Cool. All right, so community ecology, we're going to actually talk about those interactions. We're going to talk about how they're dependent on each other. All right, what is a community? And we said that interactions between species. You nailed it. And we want to talk about the general space that they live in. So I just totally gave the answer. What is a habitat? So who wants to define a habitat? Yeah.
In area which there are plants, there are many populations and they all have interactions with each other.
Okay, so it's an area and that's where they interact and there's plants and there's animals and there's stuff. Okay. So what defines habitats? You got any ideas? No?
Would be the animals habitat.
The animals could.
Species.
Okay, what else? What's going to determine what animals live in places? Temperature, climate. What else? Food sources, yeah.
Abiotic and biotic factors.
Abiotic and biotic factors, that's good. That's a big, broad categories. Okay, so what have we talked about so far? We said temperature, is that biotic or abiotic? Abiotic, why? It's not living, yes, because that is what abiotic means, exactly. So what are some other abiotic factors?
Sunlight.
Sunlight, yeah.
Water.
Water, what else?
Rocks.
Rocks, yeah, like what kind of rocks, if there's rocks. Cool. What are some biotic factors that could determine a habitat? Animals, what do you mean by that? The animals that are living there? Okay. Sorry. Vegetation, what do you mean by that? Like, types of plants, yeah, so like types of animals, types of plants. Simran, did you have another idea to?
It's basically the same thing.
Basically the same thing? Okay, so what's another term for these biotic and abiotic factors? I'm gonna give you a hint, it's another word that's on the board.
Resources.
Resources, Now you volunteer? Okay, that's good. That'll work. Right, so a lot of times these are determined by resources. And now, how do you think that plants and animals might interact in terms of the resources available? What are some interactions that the animals could have? They eat the plants. Okay, yeah. So they're dependent on these resources and they interact in terms of these resources. Cool. What else we got? All right, so how do species interact? Let's talk more about that. So you said that they eat each other. So or that animals eat plants. What other interactions can species have in an environment? Animals eat other animals. All right. So far there's a lot of like death and destruction and killing. What else we got? What other ways do? Yeah.
They drink water.
They drink the water. Yeah. Okay. That's more death and destruction and killing. I like it. All right. What else? How else do these species interact? Is there anything other than death and destruction and killing? Do they ever get along?
Yeah.
Do they ever help each other?
Yeah.
So what is that? What happens there? What's that? Mutually help each other. Okay. Symbiotic relationships, yeah. All right. So let's talk about so we've talked about death and destruction, and that kind of goes into competition, right? They compete for these resources. So someone said that they drink the water. So they might compete for that water, right? What do you think that competitive exclusion could mean? Let's take guesses. Let's take some risks here. You've heard of that word, right? Who's heard of the word exclusion? What does it mean when you exclude someone? You leave them out. Okay. So what could it mean in terms of species interacting? Yeah.
Every species is fighting for the resources needed to live, and if your species not survive that, then you'll be excluded.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense, right? So species are competing for resources, and if your species can't compete and can't survive, it will be excluded from those resources. So what does it mean? So that makes sense, right? That sounds like those words put together. What does it mean when a species is not surviving? What's a nice biology vocabulary word for species dying? Extinction, yeah. So this is actually a really big principle in ecology, the competitive exclusion principle. So it's saying that when species compete, one species will out-compete the other one, and that species will go extinct. Because one species is better at competing for those resources and will out-compete for those resources. So now I want you to think about the world. Does it sound like this happens all the time? Species are going extinct left and right and out-competing and going crazy? No. So there's got to be something else at play here. I mean, and that's something else we'll get into as ecological niches. And some people say niche. I generally say niche, just because it seems less fancy, I guess. Niche seems a little too fancy for me. You can say whichever one you want to, and you'll probably hear both throughout your biological studies. Has anyone ever heard that term before? Yeah.
Is it the role that the animal plays in the environment or the animal?
The role that the animal plays in the environment. Yeah. So how is that different than a habitat? What do you guys think? Is a habitat different than a niche? Fifty-50 shots here. Let's take some risks. What do you think? Yeah.
Could it be that the niches just involve the biotic factors?
I'm sorry?
Like, it doesn't involve the abiotic factors?
The niche doesn't involve abiotic factors. Niches can involve abiotic factors, because a niche can be about space that it takes up and light that it takes up. But that's a part of it. That's definitely part of it. Yeah.
Is it the interaction with the habitat?
It's an interaction with the habitat. So it's a little bit more than a habitat, right? A habitat is just the space, and the space is defined by biotic and abiotic factors. However, a niche is going to be more of a role. It's going to be more about what that particular species can do in a habitat. So there's kind of two different kinds of niches, a fundamental niche and a realized niche. What do you think that a realized niche could mean? I want to hear some other people. I appreciate the few volunteers we've had so far. What else you got? Who else would like to volunteer? Anybody over here? I'm gonna make some more eye contact. What does it mean? What do you think it means? Realize a niche. Versus fundamental niche. Any guesses? What do you think? Josh, what do you got?
Realizing it's just something that's taught to you versus fundamental, that's something that you already know.
I'm having a lot of trouble hearing you.
Realizing it's just something that's taught to you, like, for example, we bird teaches its baby to fly, whereas the fundamental is just something that you already know, you're born with it.
Okay, I mean, I think that could be a part of it. So what does it mean when you realize something? Yeah.
Adapt to something?
You adapt to something. That's a part of it as well, yeah.
Did you say that it's like adapting to like the habitat, like to limited like resources or something like that?
The limited resources, that's also a part of it. So a realized niche is kind of like an actual niche. And the difference between the two, so a fundamental niche is going to be the entire niche that a species could take up. So it could use these abiotic factors, it could use these biotic factors. That's the entire space it could inhabit, that's the entire job it could do. Versus a realized niche is an actual niche, what it actually does. So why do you think that there's a difference between the two? Why do you think that species don't necessarily take up their fundamental niche and instead have a realized niche?
Maybe because of limiting factors.
Limiting factors like what? I'm having trouble just hearing you.
Predators, like equals to more predators.
Predators, okay. So they might not be able to take up they might not be able to have their fundamental niche, they might have a realized niche because of predators. So what about, what else? What other reasons?
Fundamental niche is like kind of what they're born with. It's like the habitat they're born in, and realized niche is like as they grow up, like the factors that play into it.
So I
into the
think
habitat, resources, species.
you're on the right track.
Okay.
I think you're thinking about it as individuals in a species, as opposed to an entire population. So if you kind of extrapolate that into an entire population, so with fundamental niche is what they're born with, what they can do, in terms of a species.
Okay.
And then a realized niche is what the actual species does do. So why? Why is there this difference between what they can do and what they actually do?
There might be a lack of resources to live.
Okay, so why is there a lack of resources?
Well, maybe because, like, of the temperature, or the climate of the habitat.
So, but the realized niche is saying in that habitat,
Oh.
they're able to take up this job, this function, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, you had your hand up first.
I think the species are so busy competing with other species that they only use what they have to like compete, but there's like other things that they can do to like reach their full potential, but they can't do that because they're too busy competing with us other species.
Okay, so competition limits their niche into a realized niche. Were you gonna add something to that? That was it? All right. Okay, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. So competitive exclusion kind of balances this out. It says species are competing for all of the resources, however, they're only allowed to use a certain amount of them because of competition. They're excluded from these other resources due to better competitors. Absolutely. Yeah. All right, so here's an example of it. These are barnacles. Barnacles live, so this is the ocean, this is a giant rock. Barnacles live on the edge of rocks. They're filter feeders, so the water comes up and they eat the stuff in the ocean. You should Google them if you want to know some more information. They look like this. And we're looking. So we have two types of barnacles. We have these brown ones and these bluish gray ones. Now let's look at this as a whole. So we have fundamental niches and realized niches. So where can the brown barnacles live? Yeah. Yeah, so what does that mean? Like if you were to describe that in terms of describing this graph. So what is their fundamental niche?
Brown.
What, yeah.
Is it the amount of space they have? They can live anywhere they want. That's how much choice they have.
What do you mean anywhere there?
Wherever the ground goes.
Okay, the arrow. So they could live here, they could use the resources here. However, what's their realized niche? Even
Above the bluish.
above the blue, yeah. So right here, right? Realized niche is here.
And it's due to competitive exclusion.
I'm having trouble hearing you.
Competitive exclusion.
Competitive exclusion.
The gray ones are taking up all the space at the bottom because they're better at competing in lower areas.
Great, okay, so you answered my next question, awesome. So I was gonna ask, so why, so if they can take up this space, why don't they? And you said the gray ones are better competitors, they're out competing the brown, So why do they not continue out competing all the way up to the top of the rock, up to the high tide line? Somebody, yeah.
Their fundamental niche doesn't reach it then?
So the gray so they cannot live up there. They cannot use those resources up there. Exactly. So that's what we're talking about. So I'm gonna do one more example. And that example is kind of a big deal in terms of community ecology, because scientists thought that they had found some evidence that contradicts this idea. So we have this kind of fundamental principle of competitive exclusion. And they found birds. It was 5 species of birds living in an evergreen tree, or a group of evergreen trees. So they were living in the same space. And it appeared as though they were not following the principle of competitive exclusion because they were taking up the same space. It appeared that they were taking up the same niches. So what would you do as a scientist? You were introduced to this evidence, and that said, this might be evidence that contradicts our idea. Well, what do you do? You were pumped, yeah.
Well, I think I would first look if they were actually actually taking up the same niche and taking up the same range in the evergreen tree.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure that the 5 different species take up different ranges of the.
Okay, so you've heard of this experiment before. Okay. Okay. Great. All right. So, does anyone have any ideas how they would do that? So, how would you compile evidence that supports or contradicts these ideas? What do you think? What would you do? This is Unit 1 stuff. We're going back. We're going back to science as a process. You didn't believe me when I said we're going to be going through this the whole year, did you? What do you think? How would you kind of design an experiment to test this idea? So the scientists found that the birds were living in the same trees, and it appeared as though they were taking out the same niches in this ecosystem. How would you test this? What do you think?
Watch them and see what happens.
Watch them and see what happens? All right. Yeah. So collect some data, right? Is it true? All right, so that's what the scientist did. And this is what he found out. He found out that, yeah, while they're living in the same tree, this one is living at the very top. This one is living at the very bottom. They're taking up different space. They're eating slightly different food. So this is called resource partitioning. So they're partitioning these resources in the environment. What other resources do you think they might partition? Water, maybe, yeah. So they could. One thing that the scientists actually found that was interesting is that these birds would mate and lay eggs at slightly different times of the year. So how is that resource partitioning? Yeah.
You have to make a nest with the eggs in. So by laying their eggs at different times of the year, they can use the twigs instead of all of them laying at the same time, or all the twigs.
Okay, yeah. So they're using, while one species needs the most resources, the other ones don't. Yeah, I agree. So this is an example of resource partitioning. Let's talk a little bit about types of interactions. And I think someone mentioned this earlier. So what is mutualism?